5 figures were already sitting in the council hall. Lin Feng did not recognize any of these 5 figures. They were all sitting at a huge round table, and there was no distinction in their ranks. When the First Light was founded, this was the system established by the 3 co-founders, Supremacy First Light, Supremacy Round Heart, and Supremacy Prime Glory. That was, the Supremacy Elders were of the same level, at least in terms of status and authority. There was no distinction in rank. Hence, even the table of the Supreme Council was a round table. Although Lin Feng did not know any of them, the moment he entered the hall, the 5 figures all looked at Lin Feng. He could clearly tell that although one person's gaze was very calm, the pressure was incomparably immense, several times greater than that of Supremacy Round Heart. In fact, it was infinitely close to the Indefinite Sect Master and Supremacy 7 Treasures back then. The owner of this gaze must be Supremacy First Light, the peak supremacy who was infinitely close to a 2-star supremacy. Of course, Lin Feng had met the Indefinable Sect Master and Supremacy 7 Treasures before. The Indefinable Sect Master had even attacked Lin Feng with his full power, but Lin Feng still managed to use the space-time imprint to escape. Hence, Lin Feng did not care about just a glance from Supremacy First Light at all. As for the gaze from another person, it was much less threatening than Supremacy First Light, but stronger than the other 3 supremacies. It should be the person Lin Feng needed to deal with this time, Supremacy Prime Glory. Hence, Lin Feng specially observed Supremacy Prime Glory. Their gazes met in mid-air and became confrontational as soon as they entered. As soon as both parties entered, no one spoke. The atmosphere was very oppressive and even vaguely hostile. In the end, Lin Feng and the other 5 also sat at the round table and confronted Supremacy First Light and the others. Supremacy Magnum, what is the meaning of this? Don't you know the rules of the Supreme Council of First Light? Irrelevant personnel are not allowed to enter the council hall. Supremacy Prime Glory was the first to speak, and he began to make accusations as soon as he spoke. Supremacy Magnum sneered and said, "Who said that he's irrelevant personnel? The 4 of us, as Supremacy Elders, jointly recommend this alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, the Dark Domain Supremacy Lin Feng, to join the First Light and become the 10th Supremacy Elder." What? Supremacy Prime Glory and the others wore looks of shock on their faces, as if they did not know beforehand. However, in reality, they had long guessed that Supremacy Round Heart and the others would recommend Lin Feng to join the First Light. Supremacy Magnum, what are you doing? You're simply inviting trouble. Supremacy Prime Glory's face was filled with anger. Inviting trouble? Supremacy Prime Glory, who's the one inviting trouble? The Dark Domain Supremacy is the alliance leader of the Domain Alliance. He is willing to join the First Light and become the 10th Supremacy Elder. That's expansion for the First Light, and there is only benefit and no harm to the First Light. As for you, you actually want to incorporate the First Light into the Opulent Lodge. After that, the First Light will become history and dissipate completely. It's obvious at a glance who's the one inviting trouble. Supremacy Magnum did not back down at all and immediately retorted. Supremacy Prime Glory's expression was dark. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Supremacy Magnum. Back then, the 3 Supremacy Elders jointly established the First Light to find hope. But now there's no longer any hope for us. Without 2-star boundary stones, we'll never be able to give rise to a 2-star supremacy. The Opulent Lodge can give us the 2-star boundary stones. This is hope. The First Light is only joining the Opulent Lodge and would not completely dissipate. When enough 2-star supremacies are born, so what if it's the Opulent Lodge? We can even turn the tables and annex the Opulent Lodge. Heh, Supremacy Prime Glory, who would believe what you said? Annex the Opulent Lodge instead? Do you really think that the Opulent Lodge is so kind that they won't take any precautions? In the end, you're just after that 2-star boundary stone for your own selfish reasons. Supremacy Prime Glory, although you're one of the 3 co-founders of First Light, if we're really incorporated into the Opulent Lodge out of the 9 Supremacy Elders, you may not be able to obtain that 2-star boundary stone for certain. It would be a true tragedy if you end up doing someone else's work for them instead. You? Supremacy Prime Glory's expression changed abruptly. In reality, he also knew his own situation very well. Out of the three co-founders, he had actually completely fallen behind. If the First Light was really incorporated into the Opulent Lodge, Supremacy First Light and Supremacy Roundheart would definitely be able to obtain one of the three 2-star boundary stones. Then, there would only be one 2-star boundary stone left. Among the remaining 7 Supremacy Elders, a few were actually on par with Supremacy Prime Glory. For example, Supremacy Magnum was not much inferior to Supremacy Prime Glory. At that time, it was hard to say who would get the third 2-star boundary stone. Up until now, the Opulent Lodge had never made any private promises to Supremacy Prime Glory. Hence, he was really worried. It was precisely because of this that he was so proactive. He hoped to let the Opulent Lodge see that he had made great contributions to the incorporation of the First Light into the Opulent Lodge, and hoped that it would allow him to receive a 2-star boundary stone. However, winding up doing someone else's work was also a possibility. Hence, Supremacy Prime Glory's expression changed drastically. After having his worries pointed out by Supremacy Magnum, the atmosphere became even more tense. At this moment, Supremacy First Light finally spoke slowly. "All of you sit down. What's the point of arguing further? Since it's the Supreme Council, we'll do things according to the rules. Every Supremacy Elder has the right to recommend other controllers to join the First Light. However, if you want to become a Supremacy Elder, you have to go through the verification of one of the 9 Supremacy Elders. What do you think?" Supremacy First Light's words immediately caused the noisy hall to fall silent. Supremacy Prime Glory's expression was dark as he sneered. "Of course, rules are rules. No one can break them. We also agree. According to the rules, it has to be verified by one of the Supremacy Elders. I recommend Elder Magnum." Elder Roundheart also spoke. However, Supremacy First Light and the others definitely would not agree to his recommendation of Elder Magnum. As expected, Supremacy First Light shook his head and said, "You're the joint referees. If you are the ones verifying it, there's no doubt that you can't guarantee fairness. Naturally, an elder on the side that objects has to be the one verifying. I recommend Elder Prime Glory. How about that?" As expected, Supremacy First Light side still recommended Supremacy Prime Glory in the end. Supremacy Roundheart took a long look at Supremacy First Light, but in the end, he still nodded and said, "All right, I agree to let Elder Prime Glory verify the Dark Domain Supremacy." "I agree as well." "I agree." The various Supremacy Elders also expressed their agreement to let Supremacy Prime Glory attack. Hence, Supremacy Prime Glory slowly stood up and said with a sinister expression, "Dark Domain Supremacy, come. If you want to become a Supremacy Elder of the First Light, you have to go through me. Only by defeating me can you become a Supremacy Elder of the First Light. Otherwise, forget about everything." Their gazes met again. This time, both parties no longer concealed the hostility in their eyes. There was even a hint of killing intent on both sides. "It's not suitable to fight here. Let's go to the Kiliakosm Domain Corridor. Whether we win or lose, I hope it ends peacefully." Supremacy First Light and the others immediately left the hall and headed for the Kiliakosm Domain Corridor. The Kiliakosm Domain Corridor was spacious enough for 2 1-star supremacies to fight at will. Be it Supremacy First Light or Supremacy Roundheart, both took this battle very seriously. They knew that the outcome of this battle might very well affect the true direction of the First Light in the future. Neither could afford to lose this battle. In the Kiliakosm Domain Corridor, Lin Feng and Supremacy Prime Glory confronted each other from afar. Neither party attacked immediately. Instead, they released their auras without restraint. In the distance, Supremacy First Light, Supremacy Roundheart, and the others were watching the battle. Supremacy First Light glanced at Supremacy Roundheart, then shook his head and said indifferently, "Supremacy Roundheart, why are you doing this? If you agree to the Opulent Lodge's request, you will definitely get one of the 2-star boundary stones too." In Supremacy First Light's opinion, Supremacy Roundheart was clearly jeopardizing others without benefiting himself. He could have obtained a 2-star boundary stone originally, so why did he have to object along with Supremacy Magnum and the others? Supremacy Roundheart also shook his head and said, Supremacy First Light, I'm different from you, and from Supremacy Prime Glory. Back when the three of us established the First Light, you were focused on cultivating, and Supremacy Prime Glory was focused on plundering resources. Only I was focused on developing the First Light. I also yearn for a 2-star boundary stone, but between it and the First Light, I won't hesitate to choose the First Light. Supremacy First Light also understood that their ideals were different. Or rather, be it Supremacy First Light or Supremacy Prime Glory, their feelings for the First Light were far inferior to Supremacy Roundheart's. The First Light could be said to be painstakingly established by Supremacy Roundheart. He had slowly developed the First Light step by step to its current state. Now, the First Light was in trouble and was actually about to be sold by Supremacy First Light and Supremacy Prime Glory. How could Supremacy Roundheart agree? If our ideals are different, so be it. Supremacy Roundheart, consider today's battle a battle between us. Your ideal is that for the First Light, everything else can be forsaken. My ideal is that for my own cultivation, everything else can be forsaken. However, you are destined to fail today. Supremacy First Light's gaze also gradually sharpened, displaying his ruthless nature. Oh? Supremacy First Light, you're always so confident. However, sometimes, being too confident is not a good thing. You trust Supremacy Prime Glory so much, but I think Supremacy Prime Glory will lose. At this moment, Supremacy Roundheart's emotions naturally would not be affected by Supremacy First Light. Heh, let's wait and see. Supremacy First Light knew that he could not convince Supremacy Roundheart. In that case, the outcome would be determined by battle. With the radiant moonplate, Supremacy Prime Glory was invincible in the first place. It was a fool's dream for Lin Feng to defeat Supremacy Prime Glory. After today, he would achieve his wish. The day he obtained the 2-star boundary stone was not far away. Supremacy First Light had been waiting for this day for a long time. In the Kiliacosm corridor, Lin Feng and Supremacy Prime Glory confronted each other from afar. The phantoms of their internal Kiliacosm domains gradually appeared above their heads. However, neither used his full strength and still held back. In a battle, one did not just have to show their trump card and compete. Instead, they had to take the opponent by surprise. Only by truly experiencing a life-or-death battle could the winner be determined. Dark Domain Supremacy, I heard that in the battle between the Opulent Lodge and the Indefinite Sect, you allowed the Opulent Lodge to defeat the Indefinite Sect, and made outstanding contributions. Hey, you're really foolish. Back then, you actually dismissed the Opulent Lodge's recruitment. When you reach my level, you should understand how precious the Opulent Lodge's recruitment is. Lin Feng shook his head and said, Supremacy Prime Glory, you'll never understand me. How can I regret it? I did disdain the recruitment of the Opulent Lodge. You'll never understand my ambition. Just like how ants will never understand the ambition of a divine dragon. What arrogance! Supremacy Prime Glory had cultivated for billions of years. He had never encountered such an arrogant junior. In his opinion, Lin Feng was just a controller who had gotten lucky. He was just a junior who got lucky. How could Lin Feng compare to him who had cultivated for billions of years? At this moment, Supremacy Prime Glory was already filled with killing intent. You're just trying to sound bold. I'll silence you today. Boom. Supremacy Prime Glory threw a punch. It was as if countless worlds were condensed in this punch, and there was a faint fluctuation of infinite world origin within. Even the Kiliacosm domain rules were condensed in this punch. Although Lin Feng appeared very arrogant on the surface and looked down on Supremacy Prime Glory, in reality, he did not have any intention of underestimating Supremacy Prime Glory. In fact, he took Supremacy Prime Glory very seriously. The other party was even older than Emperor Strange. He had cultivated for billions of years, and cultivated step by step to become a supremacy. With more than 20 million worlds, he was several times stronger than Emperor Strange. How could Lin Feng underestimate such a powerful entity? Hence, after his opponent threw a punch, Lin Feng did not hold back at all. Boom! His 27 million worlds suddenly erupted. For a moment, the mighty power of worlds swept out, making Lin Feng look like an invincible god of war. He met it with a punch. Thud! With a dull sound, Supremacy Prime Glory grunted and quickly retreated. His expression was very dark. Just now, he had unleashed his strongest strike. Although he had only 23 million worlds, with the enhancement of his various methods, it was even comparable to the power of 24 million worlds. This was already the limit of what he, an ancient controller, could do. It was equivalent to an enhancement of 1 million worlds. How terrifying was this? It was likely no one else could do it. However, Supremacy Prime Glory had done it. Even so, he was still not a match. He even felt that he was being crushed. After a punch, he retreated wildly. His internal kiliocosm domain shook continuously. In just an instant, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of worlds in his internal kiliocosm domain collapsed and were completely reduced to nothing. Impossible. 27 million worlds. How is this possible? Supremacy Prime Glory roared furiously. His expression was very dark, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He absolutely did not believe that Lin Feng had 27 million worlds. According to Supremacy Prime Glory's investigation, when Lin Feng defeated Emperor Strange back then, he had only barely managed to defeat him. He seemed to have used some special methods, and even Supremacy Prime Glory was on guard. As for Emperor Strange, he only had a celestial devil's true form of 16 million layers at most, which was far inferior to Supremacy Prime Glory. No matter how seriously he took Lin Feng, he only saw Lin Feng as a supremacy with about 20 million worlds. That was already the limit. Who would have thought that Lin Feng actually possessed 27 million worlds? That his worlds might even be more than Supremacy Prime Glory's? Forget about Supremacy Prime Glory, Supremacy Round Heart, Supremacy Magnum, and the others didn't expect it either. The Dark Domain Supremacy actually has such strength. Could it be that he was concealing his strength previously? That's right. He must be concealing his strength.
Otherwise, why was the Dark Domain Supremacy so confident previously?
Ha ha ha. We'll definitely win this time. The Dark Domain Supremacy is indeed worthy of being a powerful entity who can establish a colossus like the Domain Alliance in a short period of time. So he has always possessed 27 million worlds. That's close to 30 million worlds. Supremacy Round Heart and Supremacy Magnum were overjoyed, while Supremacy First Light frowned imperceptibly. As expected, the last thing I wanted to see happened. Alas, Supremacy First Light heaved a long sigh, as if he had already expected this. Huh? Supremacy First Light, Supremacy Prime Glory is definitely going to lose this time. So what if you expected this beforehand? At this moment, Supremacy Round Heart was also filled with joy, and his voice was filled with confidence. Supremacy First Light gave Supremacy Round Heart a meaningful look and heaved a long sigh. Round Heart, you still don't understand me. Based on your understanding of me over the years, how can you not know that I've never fought a battle I'm not confident in winning? Huh? What do you mean? Supremacy Round Heart suddenly had a vague premonition. Looking at Supremacy First Light's calm expression, a trace of doubt appeared in Supremacy Round Heart's heart. At this point, Lin Feng's 27 million worlds could practically trounce Supremacy Prime Glory's 23 million worlds. Even if Supremacy Round Heart racked his brains, he did not know what other methods Supremacy Prime Glory could use to turn the tables. I don't know if Supremacy Prime Glory can defeat Lin Feng either. However, Supremacy Prime Glory definitely won't lose. If Lin Feng can't defeat Supremacy Prime Glory, he cannot become a Supremacy Elder of the First Light. Hence, you are bound to lose. There's no point in struggling anymore. Supremacy First Light seemed very certain, and his tone was filled with confidence. Realization seemed to flash through Supremacy Round Heart's mind. His eyes widened as he said in disbelief, "First Light, you actually gave the Radiant Moon Plate to Supremacy Prime Glory?" Boom! At this moment, Supremacy Prime Glory's power erupted completely. A dazzling light suddenly appeared on his body. Right on the heels, a sphere of light surrounded Supremacy Prime Glory, making him look incomparably divine. Lin Feng frowned. He was just about to take the opportunity to defeat Supremacy Prime Glory in one fell swoop. But the sphere of light around the other party gave Lin Feng a strange feeling. Die! The 27 million worlds in Lin Feng's body all gathered. A mighty power quickly smashed towards Supremacy Prime Glory like a surging torrent. With such a terrifying power, even Supremacy Prime Glory, who had 23 million worlds, would be crushed. Even if he did not die, he would definitely be severely injured. However, Lin Feng saw a strange smile appear on Supremacy Prime Glory's face. He seemed very calm. He did not even move his body, nor did he make any move to resist. Thud. Lin Feng's punch landed squarely on Supremacy Prime Glory. Supremacy Prime Glory did not dodge at all. However, Lin Feng felt as if this punch had struck a wall. How terrifying was the power of his 27 million worlds. Even a kiliocosm domain would probably be reduced to dust. However, Supremacy Prime Glory did not even move. Lin Feng's strength disappeared without a trace. The sphere of light on Supremacy Prime Glory's body merely flickered slightly, and nothing else changed. Huh? Is the sphere of light? Lin Feng also sensed that this sphere of light seemed very strange. He had seen many treasures before, but ever since he became a one-star supremacy, he had never seen any treasure that could withstand the power of a one-star supremacy. Moreover, it was a terrifying power of 27 million worlds like his. No treasure could resist it. But now, this sphere of light gave Lin Feng a solemn feeling. It was as if his power had nowhere to land. No matter how strong he was, he seemed unable to break through this sphere of light. Lin Feng had never heard of such a treasure. Supremacy First Light, you actually gave the Radiant Moon Plate to Supremacy Prime Glory. This is a serious violation of the rules. The Radiant Moon Plate is the supreme treasure of our First Light. Even Supremacy First Light is only safekeeping it. You have no right to transfer the Radiant Moon Plate. Supremacy Magnum, Supremacy Round Heart, and the others had clearly recognized what kind of treasure the sphere of light on Supremacy Prime Glory's body was. It was the supreme treasure of the First Light, the Radiant Moon Plate. Lin Feng had never heard of the Radiant Moon Plate. Supremacy Magnum quickly sent a voice transmission and explained, Dark Domain Supremacy. You don't have to fight anymore. The Radiant Moon Plate is the supreme treasure of the First Light. It won't be used at all unless at a critical moment of life or death. Such a supreme treasure is so formidable that it can withstand the attack of a two-star supremacy. The Radiant Moon Plate has always been kept by Supremacy First Light. I didn't expect him to actually take out the Radiant Moon Plate and give it to Supremacy Prime Glory. This is a blatant violation of the rules. Lin Feng's heart sank. So this sphere of light was the supreme treasure of the First Light, and could actually withstand the attack of a two-star supremacy. No wonder the First Light could exist for so long, and its foundation was so profound that even Lin Feng could not imagine it. The Opulent Lodge attacked the Indefinite Sect, but targeted the First Light in a roundabout manner instead. Apart from the fact that the First Light was a controller organization, and doing so was frowned upon, there were probably some things about the First Light that the Opulent Lodge was wary of. Perhaps this Radiant Moon Plate was one of the reasons why the Opulent Lodge was wary. As expected, such a massive faction that had existed for countless years all had some unimaginably terrifying trump cards. They were not as simple as they appeared. At this moment, Supremacy Prime Glory had a sinister expression. He had the Radiant Moon Plate and was almost invincible. Then, Lin Feng would lose this competition. If Lin Feng lost, it also meant that Supremacy Round Heart, Supremacy Magnum, and the other Supremacy Elders had lost. Supremacy Round Heart's expression was dark as he stared intently at Supremacy First Light. First Light, have you really forgotten our promise back then? Supremacy First Light took a long look at Supremacy Round Heart. His face was expressionless as he said indifferently, Of course, I still remember our promise back then. However, more than that, I remember that I founded the First Light to cultivate to a higher level back then. Very well. Since our ideals diverge, so shall our paths. However, this Radiant Moon Plate belongs to our First Light. You have no right to decide its ownership alone. The three of us co-founders all control a part of the imprint of the Radiant Moon Plate. Don't even think about controlling it alone. Is that so? Supremacy Round Heart, you've always focused on the development of the First Light. On the other hand, you don't have much enthusiasm for cultivation. In reality, tens of thousands of years ago, the imprint you left in the radiant moonplate had already been completely refined by me, but you didn't know it. Supremacy Prime Glory knew it, but Supremacy Prime Glory judged the situation, and our goals aligned, so we never told you. If you don't believe me, you can try resonating with the radiant moonplate. What? Impossible! Supremacy Round Heart's expression changed drastically. Then, he suddenly began to sense the radiant moonplate. He did not want to believe it. This radiant moonplate was a treasure that the three of them had obtained together back then. No one could convince anyone to keep the radiant moonplate. In the end, the three of them left the imprint as a compromise and treated the radiant moonplate as the supreme treasure of the first light. Originally, the three of them took turns to guard the radiant moonplate every 10,000 years. However, in the past tens of thousands of years, Supremacy First Light had been in seclusion and had not even come out much. It was not appropriate for Supremacy Round Heart to rush him. In any case, they had known each other for billions of years, and both got along very well. Who would have thought that Supremacy First Light was scheming, and had completely refined the radiant moonplate and taken it for himself? Supremacy First Light, I didn't expect you to have already begun plotting so many years ago. Supremacy Round Heart was extremely disappointing. He knew that he had lost this time, and it was a crushing defeat. Having controlled the radiant moonplate, Supremacy First Light had practically had the lifeline of the First Light in his hands. Moreover, with the right to use the radiant moonplate, Supremacy Prime Glory was not someone Lin Feng could possibly defeat at all. They had already lost. Forget it. Forget it. Dark Domain Supremacy, admit defeat. We've lost. Supremacy Round Heart said with a bitter smile. Unexpectedly, Supremacy First Light had been plotting against him from the beginning. Dark Domain Supremacy, admit defeat. You've already lost completely. Supremacy Prime Glory was smug, and his tone was filled with confidence. Is that so? But I still want to give it a try. Supremacy Prime Glory, do you think you'll definitely win? At this moment, Lin Feng straightened his body. His voice was majestic as it echoed through the Kiliacosm domain corridor, attracting everyone's attention. Huh? You want to give it a try? Haha, the ignorant are simply fearless. Do you know how terrifying a treasure the radiant moonplate is? Even I can't unleash its full power. However, even with only part of its power, and with only defensive power, it's enough to defeat you. Supremacy Prime Glory sneered. He had long been very displeased with Lin Feng. He was one of the three great co-founders of First Light, but he had actually been defeated by Lin Feng and almost lost face. How could this not infuriate Supremacy Prime Glory? He could only rely on the radiant moon plate to regain some of his dignity. Supremacy Round Heart opened his mouth, but did not say anything in the end. However, the expression on his face was also very dispirited. In reality, when he learned that Supremacy Prime Glory had the radiant moonplate, he knew that they had already lost. As for Lin Feng's decision to keep trying, it was futile. Lin Feng stood in the Kiliacosm domain corridor. The world phantoms above his head became more and more corporeal. One world after another was mixed with the phantoms of worlds, vaguely containing a terrifying power. There were 27 million worlds. How terrifying was this power? Even blasting apart a Kiliacosm domain with a single punch would be a piece of cake. Lin Feng had never possessed such terrifying power. However, facing the radiant moonplate, Lin Feng knew that this was not enough. Far from enough. The radiant moonplate is indeed very strong. But what if you don't have the radiant moonplate? Lin Feng closed his eyes, and his power erupted. Boom, boom, boom. Like a tsunami. A terrifying power poured down in a frenzy like an avalanche, striking Supremacy Prime Glory hard. However, it was fully blocked by Supremacy Prime Glory's radiant moonplate. The radiant moonplate was like a bottomless pit. No matter how terrifying Lin Feng's power was, it was absorbed completely, and the radiant moonplate showed no signs of collapse. Supremacy Prime Glory, on the other hand, was calm and unruffled. He stood quietly in the void, allowing Lin Feng's attacks to strike him. He did not even move a strand of hair. Instead, he looked down at Lin Feng and smiled coldly the entire time. He wanted to see how much longer Lin Feng could keep up such a terrifying attack. In fact, Supremacy Prime Glory even developed a faint trace of killing intent. He was looking for an opportunity. Once he found an opportunity, he would kill his opponent with a single strike. He wanted to kill Lin Feng. Lin Feng's violent power landed on Supremacy Prime Glory in a frenzy. The other Supremacy Elders also exchanged looks with each other. In particular, Supremacy Magnum could not help but mutter in a low voice, "Why is this necessary? We've lost. We've already lost. He actually has the Radiant Moon Plate. You're not at fault. Dark Domain Supremacy." Supremacy Magnum knew that Lin Feng was actually not at fault at all for the entire matter. If not for the Radiant Moon Plate, Supremacy Magnum would definitely not have been able to resist Lin Feng. However, who would have thought that Supremacy First Light would give the Radiant Moon Plate to Supremacy Prime Glory? With a wrong move, one would lose the entire game. However, Supremacy First Light frowned imperceptibly, because he found it very strange. Lin Feng clearly knew that he could not break the Radiant Moon Plate, so why did he keep attacking? What was the use of such pointless attacks? As time passed, the terrifying power had almost sealed the surroundings, even blocking the vision of the various Supremacy Elders. It was difficult to see the situation inside clearly, even with mental power. After all, it was suffused with the violent power of worlds. They could only see the situation inside clearly after the power of worlds had dissipated. They could only watch from afar as Lin Feng and Supremacy Prime Glory fought. It appeared that Lin Feng was still attacking Supremacy Prime Glory in a frenzy. This is the moment. A sharp glint flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. His setup was complete. The Supremacy Elders outside could no longer see the situation of the battle clearly. At this moment, amidst the violent power, Lin Feng brazenly activated the rules of time. Reverse time, Lin Feng growled. After Lin Feng's previous comprehension, Lin Feng's rules of time could already be activated in a very secretive manner. They could even be infused into violent attacks and fuse with the power of worlds, making them impossible to guard against. By the time people sensed it, they would already be affected. Lin Feng was unwilling to lose just like that. He had to join the First Light, so he had to fight back from his desperate position and defeat Supremacy Prime Glory. The only way he could defeat Supremacy Prime Glory was through the rules of time. However, Supremacy Prime Glory had the Radiant Moon Plate. Even if Lin Feng stopped time, Lin Feng could not break the defense of the Radiant Moon Plate. Only before Supremacy Prime Glory used the Radiant Moon Plate could Lin Feng have a chance of defeating Supremacy Yuan Hui. Then only time reversal would work. It's useless, Lin Feng. You're just exhausting your strength. There's no possibility of defeating me. Supremacy Prime Glory continued to look down on Lin Feng, a trace of smugness flashing across his eyes. With the Radiant Moon Plate, he was almost invincible. So what if Lin Feng had concealed his strength? He would still have to accept his crushing defeat today. However, when Lin Feng's attack landed on Supremacy Prime Glory this time, Supremacy Prime Glory's expression changed abruptly. He seemed to have sensed a completely different power. That was not the pure power of worlds, but rules. A very special type of rules were silently infused in the power of the worlds. They suddenly enveloped Supremacy Prime Glory, catching him off guard. However, after worrying for a while, he quickly relaxed. Even Lin Feng's power of worlds could not do anything to him. What could mere rules do? However, in the next moment, he realized that something was amiss. Reverse time, Lin Feng growled. He activated the rules of time in his internal kiliocosm domain with all his might, allowing time to be completely reversed. Although he was only reversing the time on Supremacy Prime Glory, Supremacy Prime Glory was a dignified Supremacy Elder, a powerful one-star supremacy with 23 million worlds. How terrifying a power would it take to reverse the time of such a powerful one-star supremacy? How terrifying would the backlash be for Lin Feng? Lin Feng sensed the terrifying backlash immediately. The 27 million worlds in his internal kiliocosm seemed to be on the verge of collapse in an instant. A powerful force in the background seemed ready to wreck Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain completely. Chaotic Lotus. Suppress the Kiliacosm domain. Since Lin Feng had already begun to use the rules of time, and was preparing to reverse time, he naturally could not give up halfway. Hence, he summoned the Chaotic Lotus immediately. The Chaotic Lotus was the stabilizing force of Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. It was the foundation of his internal Kiliacosm domain. Hence, when the Chaotic Lotus suppressed the void, and a large amount of world origin stabilized the internal Kiliacosm domain majestically, it finally allowed the internal Kiliacosm domain to temporarily withstand the backlash from the reversal of time. In just this brief period of time, Supremacy Prime Glory's time had already begun to reverse. The aura on his body suddenly became slightly stronger. That was because Lin Feng had defeated hundreds of thousands of worlds in Supremacy Prime Glory's internal Kiliacosm domain previously. Now that time was reversed to the beginning, it had actually increased Supremacy Prime Glory's strength. However, Lin Feng did not care. He stared intently at Supremacy Prime Glory. He could clearly sense that the reversal was about to reach the point of time he needed. "We're here." Suddenly, Lin Feng's rules of time stopped. Right on the heels of that, the rules of time quickly stilled time instead, and time was no longer reversed. This point of time was before Supremacy Prime Glory had used the Radiant Moonplate. In other words, the current Supremacy Prime Glory had yet to use the Radiant Moonplate. Without the Radiant Moonplate, Supremacy Prime Glory was a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. In particular, time was still frozen, and Supremacy Prime Glory could not move at all. He could only watch helplessly as unprecedented power erupted from Lin Feng's body and landed hard on him. Die! At this moment, Lin Feng unleashed his strongest power. In fact, hundreds of thousands of worlds in his internal Kiliacosm domain were on the verge of collapse. They completely transformed into power. Like a torrent, they followed Lin Feng's punch and struck Supremacy Prime Glory hard. "No!" Supremacy Prime Glory shouted in his heart. But he could only watch helplessly as Lin Feng's terrifying power from all 27 million worlds smashed into his body. Pressed down directly like a huge rock. Thud. With a muffled sound, under still time, Supremacy Prime Glory did not even have the chance to scream. His massive internal Kiliacosm domain was blasted apart at once. Countless worlds were reduced to dust at this moment. Took one strike, just one strike. Facing Lin Feng's full power strike without any defensive measures, even Supremacy Prime Glory, with 23 million worlds, would be blasted apart in an instant. Lin Feng blasted Supremacy Prime Glory apart with a single punch. Even his internal Kiliacosm domain was blasted apart along with him. This was not the first time Lin Feng had killed a controller, but it was the first time he had killed such a powerful one-star supremacy. Even when Lin Feng was subduing the chaotic region, he had never killed a one-star supremacy. He mainly tried to recruit them, but now a one-star supremacy was dead, and he had more than 20 million worlds. Swoosh! Lin Feng grabbed a sphere of light. It was the Radiant Moonplate. Even though Lin Feng could blast Supremacy Prime Glory apart with a punch, the Radiant Moonplate was unscathed and in Lin Feng's hand. Actually, from the beginning, Lin Feng had never intended to kill Supremacy Prime Glory. After all, once he killed Supremacy Prime Glory, it would be very troublesome, and there would be no end to the repercussions. Supremacy Prime Glory was one of the 3 co-founders of the First Light, and had great influence. Once Supremacy Prime Glory was dead, there would definitely be some unrest in the First Light. Lin Feng did not want to join a First Light that was falling apart. Unfortunately, Supremacy Prime Glory had the Radiant Moonplate. Lin Feng had no choice but to use the rules of time. The importance of the rules of time was self-evident. If Supremacy Prime Glory found out, the consequences would be unthinkable. Hence, Supremacy Prime Glory must die. Supremacy Prime Glory. He's dead. Supremacy Prime Glory is actually dead. Heavens, Supremacy Prime Glory has the Radiant Moonplate. How can he be dead? Everyone was stunned. As Lin Feng had deliberately used the power of worlds to set up layers of obstacles, the Supremacy Elders at the side could not see the scene of the battle. Hence, they did not know about the death of Supremacy Prime Glory immediately. However, as Supremacy Prime Glory was blasted apart by Lin Feng's punch, and the power of the worlds dissipated. They naturally saw the scene inside, and saw Lin Feng grab the radiant moon plate. As for Supremacy Prime Glory's life force, it had long disappeared. There was only one possibility. Supremacy Prime Glory had fallen completely. You killed Prime Glory. Suddenly, a sharp glint erupted in Supremacy First Light's eyes. Infinite killing intent swept towards Lin Feng like a flood. At the same time, Supremacy First Light's power of more than 90 million worlds enveloped Lin Feng like a mountain. At this moment, Supremacy First Light was completely enraged. He had never expected that even with the radiant moon plate, Supremacy Prime Glory would actually lose. Even Supremacy First Light himself was not confident that he could defeat Supremacy Prime Glory, who held the radiant moon plate. What kind of mysterious method did Lin Feng use to defeat and even kill Supremacy Prime Glory? Supremacy First Light no longer cared about taking the time to investigate. He only had one thought now, and that was to kill Lin Feng and eliminate the impact of Supremacy Prime Glory's death. Supremacy First Light, what are you doing? Are you trying to break the rules of the Supreme Council? Casualties in battle are inevitable. Do you want to interfere directly and start a civil war in the First Light? Supremacy Round Heart yelled, also unleashing the power of more than 60 million worlds. It swept towards Supremacy First Light in a mighty manner, restraining his energy. Even though Supremacy Round Heart was also very shocked that Lin Feng had not only defeated Supremacy Prime Glory, but also killed him, he knew that at this moment he had to stand in front of Lin Feng. Supremacy First Light, what are you doing? At the same time, Supremacy Magnum, Supremacy Dragon Universe, and Supremacy Ancient Path also reacted. They all used the power of their internal worlds to resist Supremacy First Light with Supremacy Round Heart. On Supremacy First Light's side, there were still 3 supremacies left. One after another, they joined Supremacy First Light and confronted Supremacy Round Heart and the others. For a moment, the entire Kiliacosm domain corridor became tense, as if a shocking battle would break out at any moment. Once they fell out with each other today, the First Light could only divide. In the end, no one would obtain any benefits. Lin Feng sensed the biting cold killing intent of Supremacy First Light. It was incomparably chilling, like perennial ice. However, he was not afraid at all. He still held the radiant moon plate in his hand and confronted Supremacy First Light. He had the space-time imprint. At worst, he would just activate the space-time imprint and leave. However, he had to kill Supremacy Prime Glory. As long as Supremacy First Light still had any rationality, he definitely would not dare to attack. This was because once they attacked, the First Light would definitely be torn apart and completely reduced to a small faction. The Opulent Lodge would not give an insignificant small faction a single 2-star boundary stone, let alone 3 2-star boundary stones. Once the First Light divided, it would mean that Supremacy First Light screwed up. The Opulent Lodge naturally would not accept it. The consequences would be borne by Supremacy First Light alone. In the end, Supremacy First Light might not be able to obtain anything. The two parties confronted each other for a long time. After a long time, Supremacy First Light extended his hand and beckoned. Buzz. Lin Feng felt the radiant moon plate in his hand shake violently. He could not control it at all. He also knew that this radiant moon plate had been refined by Supremacy First Light. He could not take it for himself at all, so he could only let go. The radiant moon plate transformed into a beam of light and flew into Supremacy First Light's hand. Humph, Supremacy Round Heart, you've won this time. However, there's still a long time. My ideals will not change. With that, Supremacy First Light turned around and left, taking the other 3 Supremacy Elders with him. For a moment, the entire Kiliacosm domain corridor became empty. Without Supremacy First Light and the other 3, the Elder Council could not continue. However, Supremacy First Light held back this time. This meant that Lin Feng had successfully joined the First Light and become a Supremacy Elder. Dark Domain Supremacy, it's all thanks to you this time. Haha, even Supremacy First Light could only leave despite his anger. Supremacy Prime Glory is dead. But we have an additional Supremacy Elder on our side. We've occupied 5 spots in the Elder Council. Supremacy First Light can't do anything to make the First Light join the Opulent Lodge anymore. That's right. Supremacy First Light side suffered a crushing defeat this time. They'll probably have to lie low for a long time. It also bought us precious time. Dark Domain Supremacy, no, you should be Elder Dark Domain from now on. Supremacy Magnum, Supremacy Round Heart, and the others all had joyous expressions as they congratulated Lin Feng. Moreover, at the same time, none of the 4 Supremacy Elders mentioned Lin Feng's method of killing Supremacy Prime Glory. No one asked for the reason. This was because everyone knew very well that the death of Supremacy Prime Glory probably involved Lin Feng's secret. Since Lin Feng did not say anything, they naturally would not ask. Otherwise, it would cause some trouble. However, Lin Feng was not that optimistic. He looked in the direction Supremacy First Light had left, and knew that he would probably have to fight Supremacy First Light with both his wits and his power in the future. Still, he had finally completed the first step. Next was the stage of Lin Feng's eruption. Hadn't Lin Feng joined the First Light precisely to obtain the rich foundation of the First Light? Elder Dark Domain, it's all thanks to you this time. Next, you can slowly transfer the Domain Alliance to the First Light, and let them adapt to the system of the First Light. Lin Feng nodded and said, "No problem. I'll hold a meeting of the core executives of the Domain Alliance and explain the situation to them. However, I hope you won't forget your previous promise." Haha. Don't worry. Since we've promised Elder Dark Domain the Boundary Stones, we won't go back on our word. The 4 of us will go back and prepare now. We'll collect the Boundary Stones and send them to Elder Dark Domain. It was obvious that Supremacy Magnum was very happy. Lin Feng had become a Supremacy Elder of the First Light, so they had 5 Supremacy Elders. They clearly had the advantage in the Elder Council. Hence, up until now, Supremacy First Light had never mentioned holding the Elder Council again. Instead, he remained silent, as if he would stay silent from now on. However, Lin Feng knew that Supremacy First Light definitely would not fall completely silent just like that. He would definitely think of another way. Perhaps the next time, the challenge they would face would not just be Supremacy First Light. Strength was the only standard of measurement. It was the most reliable and safest. Lin Feng had to do his best to quickly increase his strength. Hence, Lin Feng returned to the Domain Alliance immediately and gathered the core upper echelons of the Domain Alliance, such as Supremacy Yellow Sky, Supremacy Volt Wave, Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, and Supremacy Fura. He informed them of the proposal to join the First Light. In the beginning, the many supremacies were a little confused, but after Lin Feng introduced the situation of the First Light, they all understood. Now, the development of the Domain Alliance had already reached a bottleneck. The First Light and the Opulent Lodge were 2 huge mountains. They were inevitable no matter what. Hence, choosing to join the First Light was also the best choice. At the very least, the First Light could provide better resources, such as the 1-star boundary stones that Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, and Supremacy Fura needed. After joining the First Light, Lin Feng could obtain the 1-star boundary stones that the 3 of them needed, giving them a chance to become 1-star supremacies. Moreover, joining the First Light meant that they would still be under the command of Lin Feng, a Supremacy Elder, and belong to his faction. Even if the First Light had the ability to slowly infiltrate and gradually break up the Domain Alliance, that would definitely take time, at least thousands or tens of thousands of years. For the time being, the people from the Domain Alliance were not worried. As for tens of thousands of years later, everyone would obtain the resources they deserved. Moreover, after tens of thousands of years, who would know what the First Light would be like? Perhaps at that time, Lin Feng would have even become a 2-star supremacy. Hence, no one objected too much. They unanimously adopted the resolution to add the First Light. It was not difficult for the Domain Alliance to join the First Light. When Lin Feng returned to the First Light headquarters, he realized that Supremacy Magnum was already waiting for Lin Feng. Elder Dark Domain, did everything go smoothly? Everything went smoothly. From today onwards, the First Light can send people to the Domain Alliance. Haha, Elder Dark Domain is indeed straightforward. During this period of time, we haven't been idle either. The 4 of us have also fulfilled our previous promise. We took out almost all the boundary stones Elder Dark Domain needs. Just the thought of 50 million boundary stones was terrifying. Back then, Supremacy Magnum had said that once Lin Feng joined the First Light, boundary stones would be almost inexhaustible to him. It was not empty talk. Moreover, Lin Feng keenly discovered 8 one-star boundary stones among these boundary stones. He could not help but be incomparably shocked. These were one-star boundary stones, which countless ordinary controllers would go insane over. Even after Lin Feng became a one-star supremacy and plundered many boundary stones, he still did not obtain any more one-star boundary stones. This was enough to show how precious one-star boundary stones were. Even if they were inferior to 2-star boundary stones, they were still very precious, and not something that could be obtained easily. Originally, Lin Feng had already promised Supremacy Autumn and the others to ask for 3 one-star boundary stones for them. He believed that if he asked politely enough, Supremacy Magnum would still agree to it out of respect for him. However, before Lin Feng could take the initiative to ask, Supremacy Magnum already offered 8 one-star boundary stones. This was simply a pleasant surprise, and it was enough to show how much importance Supremacy Magnum and the others placed on Lin Feng. They naturally could not go back on their word to Lin Feng. After all, Lin Feng was already a member of the First Light, and a Supremacy Elder at that. If they developed some animosity over these matters and Supremacy First Light roped him in instead, the gains would not make up for the losses. In this world, there was no such thing as eternal friends. Only benefits were eternal. They knew this very well. Even if Lin Feng had not gotten along with Supremacy First Light and the others previously, it was not impossible for the two to join forces again for the sake of benefits. All right, I'm very satisfied with this great gift from Supremacy Magnum and the others. Lin Feng could not help but laugh aloud as well. Seeing Lin Feng's satisfied expression, Supremacy Magnum also heaved a sigh of relief. In reality, these 8 one-star boundary stones were not delivered so smoothly. The other boundary stones were one thing, and the Supremacy Elders did not need them. However, the one-star boundary stone was different. It could be used to nurture a one-star supremacy. No one would complain about having too many one-star supremacies. A one-star boundary stone was almost equivalent to a future one-star supremacy. 8 one-star boundary stones meant 8 one-star supremacies. If they were rewarded to their subordinates, there would be a few more one-star supremacies, which would also be greatly beneficial to their faction. In the end, it was Supremacy Round Heart who made the final decision, and urged every Supremacy Elder to take out 2 one-star boundary stones for Lin Feng. The new Supremacy Elder could be considered full of sincerity. However, Lin Feng also knew that these Supremacy Elders had lived for billions of years, and their foundations were immeasurably deep. They must have some more one-star boundary stones, but those all belonged to their reserves. Lin Feng also knew to quit while he was ahead. 8 one-star boundary stones were enough. Lin Feng did not intend to devour these 8 one-star boundary stones. He also had to nurture a team. It was a pity to devour one-star boundary stones. Using them to nurture subordinates would allow him to obtain 8 subordinate one-star supremacies. By the way, Supremacy Elders, can you give me some more world origin? Lin Feng did not stand on ceremony. He asked the 4 Supremacy Elders for world origin directly. However, the attitude of the various Supremacy Elders towards the world origin was different. Supremacy Magnum also had a troubled expression on his face. He shook his head and said, "We can put together some world origin again, but Elder Dark Domain, don't hold too much hope. At most, being able to put together 10 million portions of world origin is already our limit. After all, Supremacy Elders like us actually need world origin too." Lin Feng understood that world origin was different from boundary stones. The boundary stones were indeed useless to those Supremacy Elders. However, world origin could increase the origin of their internal kiliocosm domains. It could even nurture worlds in their internal kiliocosm domain. Although the consumption would be huge, it could also increase their strength. No one would complain about having too much world origin. Lin Feng was already very satisfied with being able to gather 10 million portions of world origin. "Thank you for your trouble, Supremacy Magnum." Supremacy Magnum and Lin Feng also chatted happily. In any case, it could be considered a successful exchange. Supremacy Magnum and the other 3 Supremacy Elders also fulfilled their promises. Next, it was time to cultivate 50 million boundary stones. Lin Feng looked at the boundary stones in front of him and felt incomparably emotional. Back then, in order to get a boundary stone, he had searched all around the New Swirl domain, but in the end, he had gained very little. But now, a total of 50 million boundary stones were right in front of him. In fact, someone had taken the initiative to give them to him. He got them almost effortlessly. As expected, as his strength increased, it became easier and easier for Lin Feng to obtain boundary stones. In fact, Lin Feng even had a total of 8 one-star boundary stones, which he had thought could only be chanced upon by luck previously. Before entering seclusion, Lin Feng rewarded the 3 one-star boundary stones to Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, and Supremacy Fura. Their faces were filled with excitement, and they could barely believe their eyes. Those were one-star boundary stones, something that could only be chanced upon by luck. Supremacy Autumn had once joined the Primordial Lodge and the Domain Alliance for a single one-star boundary stone. Now he had even joined the First Light. Wasn't it all for a single one-star boundary stone? In their eyes, this was not just a boundary stone but also hope. Of course, Lin Feng knew what the one-star boundary stone meant to them. Seeing how excited the 3 of them were, Lin Feng could not help but think of Supremacy First Light. If even a one-star boundary stone meant this much, how much must Supremacy First Light desire to obtain a 2-star boundary stone, if he went to such lengths to get one? If he could not obtain it, what kind of despair and torture would it be? Lin Feng had a vague feeling that Supremacy First Light would definitely not let the matter rest. He would definitely make a comeback. In fact, he might already be plotting something nefarious. Lin Feng also had to hurry. He could not place his hopes on Supremacy First Light's benevolence. Against Supremacy First Light, the current Lin Feng had no chance of winning at all. Apart from activating the spacetime imprint and escaping, there was nothing he could do. This sense of being unable to control his own fate made Lin Feng feel very unsafe. Hence, he needed to increase his strength as fast as possible. In the secret chamber, not only were there 50 million boundary stones in front of Lin Feng, there were even 10 million portions of world origin. He knew that these 10 million portions of world origin must have been put together by Supremacy Magnum and the other 4 Supremacy Elders together. It was almost their limit. Even though First Light had a deep foundation, they were only 4 Supremacy Elders. The other 5 Elders, including the various resources of the fallen Supremacy Prime Glory, also fell into the hands of Supremacy First Light and the others. If Lin Feng could obtain all the reserves of Supremacy First Light and the other Supremacy Elders, there was no knowing how much he would improve. At the very least, it should not be a problem for him to become a 2-star Supremacy. However, Supremacy First Light hated Lin Feng to the bone. Naturally, he could not give the resources to Lin Feng. Lin Feng to negotiate this matter slowly in the future. Of course, the prerequisite was that Lin Feng had the strength to manage it. Currently, Lin Feng only had the power of 27 million worlds. He was not even qualified to negotiate. Devour! Lin Feng no longer hesitated. With a sweep of the power of worlds in the internal Kiliacosm domain, he swept all these boundary stones into the internal Kiliacosm domain. The chaotic lotus shook slightly, and countless roots pierced deeply into these boundary stones. Even though the chaotic lotus had many roots, it would still take a long time to completely absorb 50 million boundary stones. However, Lin Feng did not stay idle. While the chaotic lotus was slowly devouring the boundary stones, he was also using the chaotic lotus to slowly grow worlds. The 10 million portions of world origin had long been fused into the internal Kiliacosm domain. Moreover, the previous 5 million portions of world origin still had not been used up. Hence, it was enough to support Lin Feng to grow many worlds this time. Just as Lin Feng was busy increasing his strength wildly, the interior of the First Light was not calm either. Lin Feng's incorporation of the Domain Alliance into the First Light did not cause much of a stir. However, it was said that Supremacy Prime Glory had fallen when he was testing Lin Feng, and was killed by Lin Feng directly. As soon as the news spread, It caused an uproar in the First Light. However, Supremacy Magnum and the others were already prepared and made thorough arrangements. Hence, nothing went wrong. Instead, the factions under Supremacy Prime Glory were divided among the various Supremacy Elders in basically a very short period of time. All traces of a dignified Supremacy Elder disappeared completely. The entire First Light fell silent. But behind the calmness, there was a storm faintly brewing. In Supremacy First Light's palace, the other 3 Supremacy Elders were also on standby with solemn expressions. In the palace, there was an unfamiliar Supremacy. He looked like a very amiable old man, but Supremacy First Light and the other Supremacy Elders all looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy, and as if they were under heavy pressure. If Lin Feng were here, he would recognize at a glance that this unfamiliar Supremacy was the only 2-star Supremacy in the opulent lodge, Supremacy 7 Treasures. The appearance of Supremacy 7 Treasures in the First Light was already very surprising in itself. But now, Supremacy First Light and the others actually appeared like subordinates in front of Supremacy 7 Treasures. This was even more shocking. The atmosphere in the palace was very solemn. No one spoke. Even Supremacy First Light frowned and did not say a word. After a long while, it was Supremacy 7 Treasures who said slowly, "Supremacy First Light, I'm very disappointed in you." Supremacy 7 Treasures' gaze swept across the 4 Supremacies one by one, before stopping on Supremacy First Light. Originally, Supremacy 7 Treasures had high hopes for this powerful Supremacy who was infinitely close to a 2-star Supremacy. He felt that with Supremacy First Light's powerful strength, and as one of the co-founders of the First Light, it should not be a problem for him to completely control the First Light. Unexpectedly, Supremacy First Light had suffered a crushing defeat this time. Even Supremacy Prime Glory had fallen. Not only had he failed to completely control the First Light, he was even at a disadvantage. Supremacy 7 Treasures was very disappointed in Supremacy First Light. If Supremacy First Light had not sworn that this matter could be resolved, Supremacy 7 Treasures would not even have been able to resist attacking him personally. Supremacy 7 Treasures, actually, we've underestimated that alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, the Dark Domain Supremacy this time. Supremacy First Light said slowly. Dark Domain Supremacy? I know that little fellow has some secrets. Originally, I didn't think much of it, but I didn't expect him to improve so quickly during this period of time. Looks like I've underestimated the secrets he has. Supremacy 7 Treasures narrowed his eyes slightly. He was honest about his misjudgment. Supremacy First Light, there's no point in saying anything else. The Dissension Passage of the Opulent Lodge headquarters will open soon. If you can't deal with the First Light, when the Dissension Passage opens, even I won't be able to stop the other 2-star Supremacies from attacking. You'll have to consider carefully whether you want to do it yourself, or leave it to our Opulent Lodge. This was no longer just a threat, but a warning and also the truth. The Opulent Lodge's Dissension Passage was about to open. At that time, more than one 2-star Supremacy would descend. How could the First Light resist such a colossus? Supremacy First Light's heart skipped a beat. Actually, it was precisely because he knew that the Opulent Lodge's Dissension Passage was about to be reopened that he made this choice. It was because it was his only choice. All the pressure was focused on Supremacy First Light. He was one of the 3 co-founders of the First Light and the strongest expert of the First Light. He bore the heaviest pressure. This time, he had to express his stance. Supremacy 7 Treasures. I will completely resolve the problem of the First Light before the Dissension Passage opens. Give me a little more time, Supremacy First Light said in a low voice with a hint of resolution. Is that so? Supremacy First Light, it's not that I don't want to give you time, but that there's indeed not much time left. Once the Dissension Passage is opened, those 2-star Supremacies won't be as easy to get along with as me. In order to protect the First Light, you've put in a lot of effort. I hope you won't disappoint me this time. With that, Supremacy 7 Treasures left directly. He had already delivered the message. As for what Supremacy First Light would do, that was Supremacy First Light's business. Supremacy 7 Treasures would not interfere. Moreover, if Supremacy 7 Treasures interfered now, things would only get worse. Supremacy 7 treasures would only wait silently for the Ascension passage to open. Once the Ascension passage opened, regardless of whether Supremacy First Light had resolved the problem of the First Light, the Opulent Lodge would attack the First Light. As Supremacy 7 treasures left, the atmosphere in the palace clearly eased a little. Supremacy First Light, how are you planning to deal with Supremacy Roundheart and the others? Supremacy Roundheart has 5 Supremacy Elders on his side now, and after we lost Supremacy Prime Glory, we only have 4 Supremacy Elders. It's impossible for us to suppress the other party in the Elder Council. But what else can we do to completely suppress Supremacy Roundheart and the others, and take over the entire First Light? The Opulent Lodge doesn't have much time left for us. The remaining 3 Supremacy Elders were all discussing anxiously. The current situation was becoming more and more disadvantageous to them. If they did not control the First Light as soon as possible, when the Opulent Lodge's Ascension passage opened and the Opulent Lodge took action personally, the First Light would be in big trouble. In fact, the entire First Light would be destroyed. From perspective, Supremacy First Light was only enduring the humiliation out of his sense of duty. He was only working with Supremacy 7 treasures because he wanted to preserve the First Light. Everyone's gaze was focused on Supremacy First Light. Only Supremacy First Light had the right to make the decision. Supremacy First Light looked into the distance. His tone gradually turned cold, and there seemed to be a hint of helplessness. He muttered in a low voice, "I have to make up my mind. Originally, I didn't want to come to this point, but from the looks of it, I have no choice but to take this step. Supremacy Roundheart, don't blame me. I'm also doing this to protect the entire First Light." Supremacy First Light muttered softly and lowered his eyes. However, his aura became colder and colder, and was vaguely sinister. In Supremacy Dragon Universe's palace, Supremacy Dragon Universe was sitting upright on the throne at this moment. His expression was slightly solemn, as if he was hesitating about something. Just now, he had received news from an unexpected person. Supremacy First Light invited me over for a conversation. What does he want to talk about? To persuade me to betray Supremacy Roundheart. Supremacy Dragon Universe sneered inwardly. However, he could not ignore Supremacy First Light's invitation. After all, Supremacy First Light was the strongest person in the First Light and one of the 3 co-founders. He had unparalleled influence in the First Light. Even though they were on opposing sides for the time being, in reality, Supremacy Dragon Universe really did not consider Supremacy First Light a mortal enemy. At most, he just felt that their ideals were incompatible. Forget it. There's no harm in meeting Supremacy First Light. I'll see what Supremacy First Light wants to say. Supremacy Dragon Universe made up his mind. So he stepped out of the palace and headed for the location Supremacy First Light had given. Swoosh! Supremacy Dragon Universe appeared in the empty Kiliacosm domain corridor. Supremacy Ancient Path, you're here too. As soon as Supremacy Dragon Universe arrived at the Kiliacosm domain corridor, he saw an old acquaintance, Supremacy Ancient Path. Supremacy Ancient Path was also very surprised. He asked in confusion, "Supremacy Dragon Universe, you're here too? Could you have also received an invitation from Supremacy First Light?" "That's right. Supremacy First Light invited me here to discuss something. Do you have any news? Could Supremacy First Light be asking us to betray Supremacy Roundheart?" "That's very likely. After all, Supremacy First Light is already at a disadvantage now. But how can we betray Supremacy Roundheart? Or rather, our ideals are the same as Supremacy Roundheart's. How can we betray our ideals?" The 2 supremacies chatted briefly, both feeling that Supremacy First Light would make them betray Supremacy Roundheart. This was because this seemed to be the only way for the current Supremacy First Light to suppress Supremacy Roundheart again. However, the 2 of them had their own ideals to begin with, and would not betray each other lightly. Wait, why haven't I seen Supremacy First Light yet? Moreover, Supremacy Magnum isn't here. If he really wants us to betray Supremacy Roundheart, shouldn't Supremacy Magnum be invited too? The 2 supremacies were a little confused, but neither of them thought of the worst possibility. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the 9 supremacy elders who jointly ruled the First Light were as close as brothers. Even if they fell out with each other, neither of them had actually thought of killing the other. They just felt that their ideals were incompatible, and they had to stand firm to their ideals. Suddenly, a sigh came from the Kiliacosm domain corridor. Right on the heels of that, a familiar figure appeared in front of the 2 supremacies. Supremacy First Light? You called the 2 of us here. If you have anything to say, say it. If you want us to betray Supremacy Roundheart, there's no need to say it. Supremacy Dragon Universe said coldly. Supremacy First Light raised his eyes and glanced at Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path. However, he still shook his head and said, I did want to persuade you to betray Supremacy Roundheart, but from the looks of it, you already have the answer. Actually, I wouldn't use such a method unless absolutely necessary, but I have no choice. However, I can tell you that everything I did was for the entire First Light. I didn't break the promise I made when I founded the First Light. That was my promise. However, I have no choice. Supremacy First Light's voice gradually deepened, and there was even a faint killing intent in his voice. He had no choice. If he did not completely control the First Light, the Opulent Lodge would take action personally. Once the 2-star supremacies of the Opulent Lodge personally took action, what could be left of the First Light? Supremacy First Light gritted his teeth. He did not want to do this, but he no longer had a choice. Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path's eyes suddenly widened. The 2 of them had already sensed a murderous aura. As if they had been jolted awake in an instant, they seemed to realize something. Supremacy First Light, what are you doing? Supremacy First Light, do you really want to reach this point? Once you take this step, the First Light will no longer be the First Light. You'll be damned for eternity. Boom! As the 2 supremacy elders cried out in alarm, the massive Kiliacosm domain with more than 90 million worlds in Supremacy First Light's body instantly descended. No. Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path's eyes widened as they stared intently at Supremacy First Light. Even in death, they could not believe that Supremacy First Light had actually attacked them. Supremacy First Light actually wanted to kill them? Up until now, the 9 Supremacy Elders had been as close as brothers. Even if they opposed each other, they had never thought of killing each other. But now, Supremacy First Light had attacked and killed 2 Supremacy Elders with a single move. Thud. The internal Kiliacosm domains of the 2 Supremacy Elders instantly exploded and turned to ashes. Under the crushing power of more than 90 million worlds from Supremacy First Light, a mere 10 million or 20 million worlds were nothing. They could not even withstand it for half a breath before being crushed into dust. The corridor of the Kiliacosm domain was silent. Supremacy First Light's eyes were a little bloodshot, and he was very silent. Even his hands were trembling slightly. In the end, he had still reached this point. Actually, he had thought that he might reach this point a long time ago. However, when he really did, he still could not remain indifferent. Supremacy First Light. The remaining 3 supremacies wanted to comfort Supremacy First Light, but they did not know what to say. They hesitated. From today onwards, perhaps the First Light had already been completely divided. No matter what difficulties Supremacy First Light had, today's matter had ultimately created a rift that could not be repaired. Let's go. Everything here has been cleaned up. Supremacy Roundheart won't know that I killed these people either. Even if he knows, he can only rely on speculation. After we return, we'll immediately propose to hold an Elder Council to vote on the direction of the First Light and completely determine its fate. We don't have much time left. Supremacy First Light muttered softly. Then, he took a step forward and disappeared without a trace. Boom! At this moment, explosions were everywhere in Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. The world grown from the chaotic lotus required an explosion to form a true world. As there were simply too many worlds grown by Lin Feng this time, they formed various phenomena now. One world after another exploded, but they did not shake the internal Kiliacosm domain. On the contrary, after the explosions, the increase in worlds made Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain expand continuously. The the kiliocosm domain could also expand. In fact, it was boundless and seemed to have no limit. If it continued to expand, Lin Feng even felt that, in the end, his internal kiliocosm would not be much smaller than the entire small kiliocosm. Perhaps this was the principle of a controller's improvement. From a 1-star supremacy to a 2-star supremacy, and even to a 3-star supremacy, it was a quantitative process of accumulation. Only after accumulating a certain amount of quantity could one undergo a qualitative metamorphosis and become a kiliocosm sovereign. However, the accumulation of this quantity was the most upsetting and hopeless process. Lin Feng had once tried to hypothesize how a small kiliocosm could give rise to 2 or 3 3-star supremacies. Theoretically speaking, this was impossible. After all, a 3-star supremacy had to possess the power of half a kiliocosm. In other words, one had to devour half a small kiliocosm to become a 3-star supremacy. If this was the case for a 3-star supremacy, what about 2, 3, or even more? Could other controllers not devour worlds? It seemed like this was a paradox. Another example was that the internal world of a kiliocosm sovereign was comparable to an entire small kiliocosm. In other words, one had to devour the entire small kiliocosm to possess the power of an entire small kiliocosm and become a kiliocosm sovereign. Then, would every kiliocosm sovereign devour a small kiliocosm? Could only one kiliocosm sovereign be born in a small kiliocosm? Lin Feng had thought of many things. However, with his current strength and knowledge, he clearly could not answer these questions, let alone know the secret behind them. All he could do now was accumulate power, and accumulate it wildly. As worlds were born one after another, the number of worlds in Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain also began to increase rapidly. Originally, he already had 27 million worlds. Now, the number was constantly increasing, as if there was no limit. From 28 million, 29 million, 30 million, 31 million. Lin Feng accelerated time, and it was the maximum time acceleration he could attain at the moment. He vaguely felt a sense of urgency, so he accelerated time to the maximum extent of load he could withstand at the moment, and accelerated time to almost its limit. Internal worlds were born at every moment. From 32 million, 33 million, 34 million, 35 million, 36 million. In the blink of an eye, the number of worlds in Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain had already risen to 40 million. From 27 million to 40 million, there was a total increase of 13 million worlds. However, it did not seem to have stopped. Lin Feng had devoured 5,000 worlds, and obtained another 10 million portions of world origin. Such a terrifying reserve was enough for Lin Feng to improve by a lot. A portion of the world origin could give rise to many worlds, and the consumption was very small. Lin Feng did not know if he could grow all 50 million boundary stones, but he had to try his best, especially in the current situation. The more strength he had, the more assurance he had. Why had he decided to join the First Light back then? Wasn't it for the sake of an almost inexhaustible supply of boundary stones? Wasn't it for that rich reserve? In order to obtain resources, Lin Feng did almost everything he could to use everything he could. Now, his wish had finally come true. This time, he believed that he could obtain an explosive improvement. From 41 million, 43 million, 45 million, 47 million. Lin Feng was completely immersed in the process, and did not notice that as his number of internal worlds increased wildly, especially after reaching 50 million worlds, there was a slight change in his internal kiliocosm domain. However, Lin Feng was already completely immersed in the wonderful feeling of the birth of a world. His perception of everything in the outside world, even everything in the internal kiliocosm domain, was very vague, and even his reactions were relatively slow. Days passed. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. As 1 month, 2 months, 3 months passed. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Lin Feng did not know how long he had been cultivating for. It seemed very long, so long that it felt like billions of years. However, it also seemed very short, so short that it felt like an instant. These two completely opposite feelings appeared in Lin Feng's heart. If Lin Feng still doesn't appear, we can only assume that he's forfeited the right to attend. How can the Elder Council be postponed? Moreover, you've already postponed it for a full 3 years. How much longer do you want to postpone it? Whether Lin Feng can exit seclusion today, the Elder Council must be convened. Vaguely, a shrill sound entered Lin Feng's ears. Lin Feng, who was immersed in a wonderful feeling, seemed to be jolted awake at once. He suddenly opened his eyes. The Elder Council can be convened at any time. Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw a familiar figure. The Dark Domain Supremacy? Elder Lin, you've exited seclusion? Elder Lin, you've finally exited seclusion. A trace of joy appeared on the faces of Supremacy Roundheart and Supremacy Magnum when they saw Lin Feng exit seclusion. As for the other supremacies, they seemed to be all supremacies under Supremacy First Light. When he saw Lin Feng, he could only snort coldly and say, "All right, since Elder Dark Domain has exited seclusion, hurry up and hold the Elder Council. The Elder Council will be held in the Council Hall tomorrow morning. I hope you can arrive on time." With that, he turned around and left. Lin Feng saw the fatigue on the faces of Supremacy Roundheart and Supremacy Magnum. He could not help but frown and say, "Supremacy Roundheart, Supremacy Magnum, what's going on? Where are Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path? With the 4 of you around, even if the Elder Council is convened, we have nothing to fear from Supremacy First Light and the others." Indeed, even if Lin Feng did not participate, there were still 4 people on Supremacy Roundheart's side. For votes to 4, there was no need to fear Supremacy First Light and the others at all. Supremacy Roundheart's expression darkened as he said, "They went missing. Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path have been missing for a total of 3 years. 3 years ago, Supremacy First Light side intended to convene the Elder Council, but we stopped them with the excuse that Elder Lin was in seclusion. We've been stalling until today. If Elder Lin still didn't exit seclusion, I'm afraid we won't be able to stall any longer." Missing? There's no traces of them at all for 3 years. Lin Feng frowned. There's a trace of abnormality in this matter. The 3 dignified Supremacy Elders were all powerful supremacies with 20 million worlds, or close to 20 million worlds. They were also within the sphere of influence of the First Light. How could they have disappeared for no reason? Lin Feng thought of a possibility. Could they have already fallen? If Lin Feng could think of this possibility, how could Supremacy Roundheart and Supremacy Magnum not have thought of this possibility after 3 whole years? They were just unwilling to believe it. Supremacy Magnum gritted his teeth and enunciated each word. "I once went to question Supremacy First Light, but Supremacy First Light denied it with all he had. Humph, in my opinion, Supremacy First Light did it. Otherwise, who could do anything to 2 Supremacy Elders? Moreover, according to my investigation after the incident, the 2 Supremacy Elders seemed to have both received an invitation. After that, they left and went to a certain Kiliacosm domain corridor. However, when I investigated the matter further, I couldn't find anything. The evidence there appeared to be cleaned up, and not even a trace could be found. Even though Supremacy Roundheart and Supremacy Magnum both had their speculations, they could not believe it. Would Supremacy First Light really go back on his promise back then, and kill Supremacy Elders like them? It had to be known that the 9 Supremacy Elders were not just the rulers of First Light. Rather, they had a friendship developed over billions of years, and were lifelong friends like brothers. Even if there was discord in their ideals now, it definitely would not get to the point of hostility. In fact, despite engaging in conflict previously, no matter what, they would not think that Supremacy First Light and the others would kill them. Even though they had some guesses, they could not believe it no matter what. Then is Supremacy First Light summoning us and convening the Elder Council for a vote this time? That's right, we'll be voting. There are very few of us this time, only 3 Supremacy Elders, and there are 4 Supremacies on Supremacy First Light side. If the Elders make a vote, we will lose. Supremacy Magnum's expression was dark. Who would have thought that 3 years ago the situation was still in their favor? There were 5 supremacies on their side, and they had all the advantages, suppressing Supremacy First Light side completely. But now, the situation had actually reversed in an instant. Once the vote was held, they were very likely to suffer a crushing defeat. The first light would be incorporated into the opulent lodge. This was an outcome that they absolutely could not accept. From the looks of it, it's imperative to find Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path. Whether the two of them were killed or not, we need to know their situation. Lin Feng quickly found the key to resolving the situation, and that was the two Supremacy Elders, Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path. He had to find their whereabouts. Even if they were really killed, he had to obtain conclusive evidence to prove that their deaths were related to Supremacy First Light. Only then could the Elder Council's vote be rendered meaningless. In particular, without personally witnessing the deaths of the two Supremacy Elders, Supremacy Round Heart and Supremacy Magnum still harbored illusions about Supremacy First Light. They still could not believe that Supremacy First Light would kill them. This kind of reluctant mentality was very likely to be used by Supremacy First Light side. This was not because Supremacy Round Heart and the others were naive, but because they had known each other for billions of years. No one would believe that Supremacy First Light would really kill people who shared a lifelong friendship with him. That was, unless they could see it with their own eyes. At this thought, Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. Supremacy Magnum. Do you know which Kiliacosm Domain Corridor Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path went to in the end? Of course I know. They went to the Tide Star Kiliacosm Domain Corridor in the end. All right, let's go to the Tide Star Kiliacosm Domain Corridor. I should have a way to find out their whereabouts. Elder Lin has a solution? That's great. Let's set off immediately. Then, Supremacy Magnum quickly rushed to the Kiliacosm Domain Corridor with Lin Feng and Supremacy Round Heart. The empty Tide Star Kiliacosm Domain Corridor looked desolate, vast, and boundless. There were no traces left behind at all. This is the place. It's in the range of a radius of about 1,000,000 miles. There shouldn't be much deviation, Supremacy Magnum said affirmatively. Then Supremacy Magnum and Supremacy Round Heart both looked at Lin Feng. They also wanted to know what method Lin Feng had to find the whereabouts of Supremacy Dragon Universe and Supremacy Ancient Path. Lin Feng placed his hands behind his back and took a deep breath. His gaze suddenly became profound. He did not search for any clues immediately. Instead, he asked Supremacy Round Heart and Supremacy Magnum, "Supremacies, I'm indebted to the care of the two of you for all these years. Although the two of you did not ask, you probably still have a question in mind. How can I improve so quickly? Right?" Lin Feng spoke directly, as if breaking a fa. Ade. This was an unspoken mutual understanding between everyone. Supremacy Round Heart and the others would not take the initiative to ask, because they were respectful of Lin Feng's secrets. However, Lin Feng knew that this matter could not be concealed at all. In the past, it could be said that he was concealing his strength, but what about in the future? In just a few years, his strength had increased by several times. Then, it could not be explained by concealing his strength. Hence, it was better to take the initiative to confess and expose the truth. This way, Lin Feng could still take some initiative. As expected, as Lin Feng took the initiative to ask, Supremacy Round Heart and Supremacy Magnum were both a little moved. It was impossible to say that they were not interested in such a huge secret. Hence, Supremacy Round Heart pondered for a moment before saying slowly, "Please elaborate." Their gazes were only focused on Lin Feng. There was also a trace of scrutiny, curiosity, and yearning in their eyes.